I've started the recording. Uh, so good afternoon, Gary. My name is Adrian DeBourg. We met, I guess, last year at the Texas Affordable Housing Conference, and I remember at the time there was, a lot of, I guess, noise around affordable housing and HB21 that has been passed in May 2025, and basically I've talked to a lot of developers. I'm also myself a businessman and investor in affordable housing. And I would like today to, discuss about, your role with the legislation and really encourage, the owners of affordable housing, the developers out there, especially in Texas, to understand, the legislation, the intent, and ultimately getting to know you and what you've done, all of the work leading to here and what you think is around the corner, in the real estate. So first, I'd like you to make an introduction of yourself, and then we'll go through some very basic questions.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. I'm the state representative for Fort Bend County area, which is just southwest of Houston, in the Richmond, Rosenberg, Fulshire area is my district. And this is I served a half term and just finishing up my third full term. So hopefully I'll be winning in November and going back to start my fourth term.
Great. Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And like I said, I've been a multifamily investor since 2018. So kind of towards the end of, the massive correction we're going through now with interest rates and, debt funds and maturities and all of the above. And I know, and I've seen and experienced, early on, everybody was kind of exploring how to play defense. And, of course, tax exemptions was definitely a way to kind of correct, the P&L. And at the time, the first kind of big change was Chapter 303. And I remember we were exploring working with Texas Essentials at the time. And I was already kind of, concerned about the ability for them to print out some annual meetings and documents to kind of provide any exemptions, which I thought at the time wasn't necessarily legit. And that's how I started to get to understand. And how much were you involved into the change in policy and Chapter 303 or HB 2071 at the time?
HB 2020 what?
71.
Oh,
that was the first change.
Okay, that's the PFC back in the previous session, right?
Correct.
Yeah. I had my own reform bill, and I couldn't get it out of the committee. And the author of HB 2071 was kind of the industry's attempt to bring reform, but it didn't have reform. And so from the House floor, I amended the bill and successfully turned it into a bill that provided some reform, and then eventually passed over in the Senate and signed by the governor. And it does really nothing for new construction. It did reform for pre-existing complexes. So this next session, I'll be having a reform bill to make Chapter 303 to be in the same mode as what we did for HB 21 this session for the HFC chapter.
Right. So you went after specifically Section 394, and basically with HB 21, what you did is, you defined the geographic scope of the HFC. Obviously, we've all learned about, the traveling HFC and the ability under what was Chapter 394 at the time before May 2025, the ability to have basically the ground lease structure and the land and the HFC owned by, a county that is way outside the jurisdiction where the actual real estate is located. And so you came, and basically what you did is you're requiring the city and the county to actually approve that HFC within that jurisdiction. There's also the 50% of the units that have to be income restricted. And then the most important piece, which you added into the policy, was the rent reduction that has to equal at least 50% of the estimated tax savings. And I want to talk about this just for a second. We're in the market right now where there's so much supply that all of the new inventory coming out on the shelf is basically offering 10, 12 weeks of free rent and concessions, and the actual market rents are going down. And so the gap between the market rent and the affordable rent, the 50%, 60, 80% AMI, is not that obvious. And therefore, the savings on the property taxes is not necessarily justified anymore. And so, the intent of the law was to make sure the gap and the savings was actually, real. And we know that there's a lot of projects out there that just pursue the traveling HFC as a, holy grail because of, the situation that we're in. How do you think this is going to unfold when it comes to like the hard deadline of January the 1st, 2027, to be in compliance and provide TDHCA the proof that you are actually delivering those savings? Otherwise, they're going to all probably see the revocation of their exemption.
Well, the part in HB 21 that says January 1st of 27, that's, you have to get permission from the jurisdiction where the property is located from. And now they may, and if you get that, then you have to then be able to demonstrate to the state to keep that exemption that you're giving at least half of your tax exemption back to lower rents below the market rate.
Right.
And so I don't know what the success rate of those that were so-called traveling get permission. And I won't know that until after January of 27.
Right. So I've talked to both some of the council that were engineering, those structures with the ground lease and the conversion to tax exempt. I've talked to some lenders that at the time also approved an adjusted tax exempted NOI to justify a refinance with some degree of recourse on the guarantors. I've also talked to actual operators and owners. I've seen the financial statements of some of those projects, and I can tell you with assurance that a lot of those projects are not going to comply. And so we've also already seen some jurisdictions, tax authorities not approving the actual exemption. And we've also seen housing authorities not willing to approve or do anything with those projects because, one, they're actually located where there's already other affordable housing projects, within the city or the county. And two, they don't really have any incentive to participate with those individuals because they've pretty much wronged the community in the first place. So I know nobody can say with exactly how January the 1st is going to unfold, but I can pretty much predict that there's a lot of projects that are not going to comply. They're eventually going to have to revert back or pay taxes. They've not escrow or they've not built enough reserve, and they're going to run out of cash. So they're going to have to dispute. There'll be another assessment, and it's going to be pretty much a mess economically. So that's why I'm very interested in trying to understand, what is potentially going to happen. And I know that's not necessarily, that's more of a business and economical question than a political or regulatory question. But there's a lot of projects out there that I know that are going to be, challenged. So the first, I guess, milestone is June the 1st. They have to self-report to TDHCA their rent roll and show that on the actual financials, all of the rents are 50% at whatever restriction that they have AMI. And so I was on a conference call with Novogradak. They did a really good job explaining with some of the counsel from Baker Hospitaler by the name of, Cynthia and Raj and some of those individuals explaining what it takes. Are you going to look into the self-reporting TDHCA, milestone as of June the 1st and get kind of an idea first of like how many projects are potentially not going to be in compliance?
Well, yeah, I'm going to look at the data from the June 1st report, because the reason that I got involved in this is because it was becoming apparent that people were not using this to provide affordable housing. They were using it because their project was underwater and they saw an opportunity to try to get 100% tax exemption, and it only helped the project as long as they didn't have to provide any rent reduction. And that was a total misuse of what the chapter is about. And so I'm interested to see if the data proves and substantiate what I thought, which is they aren't providing any affordable housing. They're still doing market rents. Now, because of all the issues that you just described, overbuilt situation, and all these other factors, the rents have come down through the market system. But to get the tax exemption, you're supposed to go lower than what the market rent is. And by doing that, in return, the state would exempt your property taxes so that the income that you lost by reducing your rent below the market rate, you could get a partial compensation by not having to pay property taxes. But if you're not providing any rent relief below the market rent, regardless of how low that market rent is, if you're not providing any additional relief below that, then you don't deserve the tax exemption. You're using it to cover your operations, to improve your P&L. And that's the wrong misuse of that chapter. And the reason, look, you go before the last two sessions, no one was using these chapters because they didn't want to have to they didn't think it was worth the effort to reduce their rent below the market rent and get some tax savings. But when they saw an opportunity to get 100% tax exemption with not reducing anything on the income side, that's what got them all interested. And that's why there was an explosion in these deals being done.
I mean, we saw, and naming a few counties like, Maverick and Pecos and, others literally approving, hundreds of projects overnight, printing, those ground lease structures, and, making those projects affordable, just on the paper, by flagging those rents. But I've actually studied some of those documents, the ground lease and operating agreement produced by some of those projects and counties, and the flaw in the original definition of Chapter 394 was, and I also remember because I was at an annual board review within the Tarrant County, where the city of Arlington was actually, complaining and petitioning onto, why some of those projects were approved. But the challenge on what was highlighted is before you came in with HB21 and a clarification and a much better definition of to your point, the intent of creating affordable housing. Before that, Chapter 394 was kind of pretty loose in a sense of they were leaving to the actual housing authority, the HFC, the requirements on what definition of AMI they wanted to have. And in some instances, as I was going through those documents, there were some restrictions that were calling out 140% AMI, which to me is ridiculous because it's actually implying that you have to increase your rent to become affordable versus reducing the rent. So we all know that every year, Novogradac is publishing by, number of household and zip codes and one bedrooms and two bedrooms and so forth, what should be the AMI restriction for 40, 50, 60, 70% AMI. But all of those projects, they were like way above and beyond. And so to your point, they removed 100% of property taxes and they had to do nothing at all on the rents, which was unbelievable. But so back to taking a step back, Gary, and again, I'm very appreciative of your time. Maybe tell the people watching this video a little bit more about, yourself. You also own some real estate and, this sort of mission, and you representing, all the communities and the people that were wronged, at the city and the county level. How did you started to get involved and how did you started to kind of push this very forward because that was the right thing to do at the time? Like what was the initiator for you to go full front and said, okay, we got to do something here?
Well, originally, yeah, I own some apartments and I know people in the industry, and I started having people in the industry back before last session that were coming to me and seeing this misuse of the PFC chapter. And it took me a while to really understand because I had never dealt with PFCs, HFCs. I didn't even know what they were. And it took me a while to really understand what they were saying because it was just shocking. See, the industry used these code words like affordable housing. And I was under the assumption that they were providing affordable housing, which meant it was something below what the market rate is. That's just the assumption that's happening. And it took a while before I understood that it was all smoke and mirrors. There was really no real definition of affordable housing. And once I started looking into it, because I'm kind of come from the industry, if it's confusing for me, someone who's in the industry, to understand this, what about the other 99% of the people who are not part of the industry? And then as these things began to explode, as developers and owners were taking advantage of this, I started having community leaders from across the state would contact their local state representative, who then would contact me. And then I started getting calls just from mayors and stuff around the city or around the state as I became known as someone who was trying to tackle this. I started getting more and more of these calls, especially when the HFCs started happening, because last session, we estimate probably 500 HFCs were attempting to be done between the beginning of the session and when the legislation was signed 5 months later in May. And it was getting to where 2 or 3 deals a day were being done somewhere around the state, mainly by 5 entities, trying to rush to paper as many as they could before the legislation became effective. And communities around the state of Texas were just taken back by how they had no ability to stop this. So Pecos County, a county of maybe 12,000 people, would go up the road 500 miles up the road or 300 miles up to Dallas and wipe out the property taxes in that community of an apartment complex, and no one had a say so. And how could one little community way down on the border wipe out billions of dollars of assessed values off the tax roll? Because we're talking about billions and billions of dollars that was being wiped out.
Yep.
I mean, under that theory, that's preposterous to think one community down in South Texas, there was no limit, could essentially wipe out the entire assessed value of every apartment complex in the community. and that community would have no say so. It's preposterous to think that that could happen. And, there's a saying that, what is it? Pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. And they went way too far. And what helped me to pass the legislation was the outcry from around the state of Texas, from mayors and city council members and stuff that were just ringing my phone off the hook about what it was going to do to their community by having billions and billions and billions of dollars wiped off their tax rolls, and they had no say so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm originally from France, and I've studied and I've been in Texas for 15 years. I'm now American citizen. I'm, raising my family here. I'm trying to do the right thing. I'm operating under, a moral compass. And as I was looking at some of my peers in the industry making those decisions, one, I knew this was not the right thing. And two, I had the prediction that eventually something's going to have to happen to be corrected. And when you look at the history of Texas, and how, as a state, we're very different from everybody else, the way we develop, the way we do business, the oil and gas, the golden rush, we've always been different. And part of it is because we're very entrepreneurial, we're very quote unquote cowboys in the way we're taking risks and moving things around and growing, those development projects from nothing to, like, now we've seen a lot of master plans and resorts. But the challenge, to your point, is I always come back to supply and demand. And there's no benefit in building those multi-million-dollar apartment complexes if, one, it doesn't serve really any need for the community, and two, nobody can afford those apartments in the first place because the rents are too high. And so now we're seeing, with the market correction, the fact that a lot of those workforce housing apartments are actually not affordable after all, because the entry point is very high compared to what an average American here in Texas qualified as workforce housing is really making on an annual basis. And all of those developments were initiated back in 21, 22, when interest rates were low, money was almost free, and they went out there and built all of those communities. The traveling and the HB21 now in effect, and all of those projects trying to be leased up and stabilized. You and I also talked about, the effect of the immigration policies, impacting those projects. But, maybe shed some light. My next question: you're a family man. You have a great family here in Texas. You're a businessman. You're also very healthy. You run a lot of marathon and Ironman races, and you're very resilient and sound, representative and businessman. But maybe shed a little bit some light on, once you pass HB21, obviously everybody went out there and threw a fist, and some groups, developers, kind of rallied together. They formed a coalition, and then they went out there and filed a petition saying that what you did, and the governor and everybody, with HB21 was non-constitutional. Can you shed a little bit some light on, what are you involved into? How much do you have to continue to fight to eventually, make sure this policy is not getting overturned?
I'm not worried about it being overturned. None at all. They try to use words like clawback. You own your own home, is that correct? And you pay property taxes. And do you take advantage of the homestead exemption?
Yes.
Okay. And this year, did we not increase your homestead exemption this past session? Okay. Next year, can we lower that if we want to?
You can. I mean, you
That's right. That's right.
decide on
The
right.
legislature created it. The legislature could next session decide to say, you know what? We don't want to even do homestead exemptions anymore. And you paid a certain price on your home based on your income, and the lender gave you a loan based on, how much property taxes you pay after your homestead exemption.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the state came next session and wiped that out entirely, a lot of people maybe couldn't afford their home, and they may even lose their home because now they would pay a lot more in property taxes. Now, we're not going to do that, but the state has the right to do that going forward. Now, we couldn't say, not only are we wiping it out, but for the last 5 years, we can go back and wipe it out for the last 5 years. That we could not do, but we can change it going forward.
Right.
That's what HB21 does. It just said, going forward, this is the new terms. It also said, going forward, that for those that were pre-existing, we said, okay, you can stay and continue doing whatever deal you got unless you sell, which means those same terms cannot be passed on to the new person, or upon refinance. But we're not going to go backwards because that would be unconstitutional to go backwards. So HB21 clearly, and before we passed HB21, I sat down with the AG's office twice and other constitutional type attorneys to make sure that, and the whole thing with Ledge Counsel, who is the team of attorneys that the legislature uses to draft bills, we looked and made sure that there is nothing unconstitutional in our bill. So I can tell you with almost 100% assurance that we're okay going forward. Now, the industry, in filing their lawsuit, they've opened up another problem. And I told them this: if they file the lawsuit, I helped create an organization that has intervened in that lawsuit. And what we're saying is the traveling, let's call it the traveling HFCs, they misused 3 lines out of a massive chapter to justify operating outside of their jurisdiction. And I believe it's very clear the intent was, if an HFC, let's say Pecos County, wanted, or Pleasanton, I think that's a city. If Pleasanton wanted to set up an office building and they couldn't find one in the city of Pleasanton, but they found one outside their city limits, that they could buy an office building to run their operation out of. They have used basically that sentence to justify that they can operate outside their jurisdiction and now wipe out property taxes, the assessed values all around the state of Texas. And that's a misuse. And I believe when the courts finally weigh in, they're going to say that all of these traveling HFCs operating outside their jurisdiction are unconstitutional to begin with. And that is going to then, now that runs the risk of not only wiping out the HFC for that time, but that would claw back and say all the tax benefits that you had received over those years, you didn't deserve those because it was unconstitutional what you did. And in those situations, they would have to pay back the back taxes, but not because of HB21, but because it's been determined that they illegally, unconstitutionally got those exemptions.
Well, in most of those projects, like you were saying earlier on the call, if you look at how many were done over the last 10 years, there were maybe 2 or 3 a year-ish. You passed HB21 in May 28, 2025. The majority of this earthquake happened like within, call it Q4 2024 all the way to May 2025. So like over a period of 8 months-ish. And so ultimately, to your point, you either comply effective May 28th and forward, or if there's a clawback, it will really bring everybody back about 8 months from whenever they receive the actual exemption in the first place, even though most of those projects have never really received the actual paperwork from the tax authority saying that their exemption was effective. But you're right. I think they're going to try to dispute this period of time. And also, to your point, if they cannot prove the actual exemption and all the benefits we talked about, effective January 1st, 2027, including receiving the local jurisdiction approval, which they will probably ask for better terms, obviously, to create true affordability and not just compliance with whatever AMI they may have received from those counties. Then it's going to go back to, if they lose their revocation, May 28, 2025. So they're still going to have, let's say, half of the year of 25 tax exempted, the other half, not tax exempted, and therefore they're going to have to pay for whatever property taxes. The challenge is, meanwhile, you have, like you said, the assessed value that may have gone up by 20, 25, 30%. They're also going to dispute the assessed value. And what's going to happen is they're going to go through filing a dispute and saying, well, we need to reduce the assessed value based on lower income, lower rents, equal and uniform analysis, and whatever. Plus, obviously, we're seeing a lot of foreclosures, bank-owned projects, because we're hitting a maturity cliff. And so there's going to be a new baseline for the tax authorities when it comes to like what those assessed values should be. And that's how they're going to recalculate whatever the taxes that were or to be paid. But it's going to take a while. So back to HB21 and them filing a lawsuit on the non-constitutional and trying to revoke or dismiss the application of the policy to their project. What is the next deadline there for this to be kind of shut down? Is it in public hearing in the next coming months? Is there going to be another session? Like, where does it sit today?
Well, I think where it sits is that a lot of lenders know, and you bring a good point. These HFCs were almost non-existent until probably 6 months before the session started in 25. So you are correct. It's about the last 6 months or so of 24, and the first 5 months of 25 is when all these got done.
Yep.
And lenders are, and what happened is really when HB 2071 was done, before the ink dried on that legislation, they switched immediately to the HFC model. But then they went on basically steroids, and really because
Yep.
this, my job as a legislature is to represent the Texas taxpayer and the citizen. That's what my number one duty is. And what the industry was doing, and hey, I'm struggling just as anyone else is because of the falling rents, the overbuilt situation, especially if you own Class C apartments, you're really getting clobbered in a lot of communities, especially in the Houston area because of ICE.
Yep.
And we have had dozens and dozens of ICE raids of these vehicles coming on our properties, 2 or 3 vehicles, and then 10, 15 people jumping out with masks and full tactical gear, stopping every Latino that they can find, and knowing that they can meet numbers that out of every 3 or 4 that they stop and detain and ask to prove citizenship, that 1 out of 4 is not going to be able to do that. Because it's estimated 25-30% of the Class C market in Houston is illegal immigrants. Now, that's not illegal in a criminal way. It's illegal because because the administration in our country has sort of stopped processing. You have this backlog of people who have been here for many, many years and they can't get processed. Anyways,
Yep.
That's creating its own economic problems in this market. And so people switch to this model purely to shore up their negative cash flow. And what they were trying to do is put on the back of the Texas taxpayer part of their negative cash flow, not to provide affordable housing, but
Right.
just to shift their negative cash flow. So the fact that they don't get the exemption, these deals were never done with, and there are some developers that did it because developers can only make money when they're developing. They don't make money when they're not developing. So they used this tool because they knew the economics would not work in the free market system. And so this tool was being used in a way that's actually exasperated the problem because it encouraged people to go and do deals that should not have been done anyways because the economics were not there. And so they took advantage of this and put more units on the market. And it only worked if they keep 100% of the property taxes. In all HB21, you said you own your home. What if the state of Texas came up to every homeowner and to you and said, look, when your property taxes come due, write two checks. 50% you write to a rent relief program, and the other 50% you write to the taxing entities. And if the state of Texas, through an audit, can see that your check to the rent relief program cleared, you can void the other check. You don't even have to pay it. Would you take that deal? That's right.
Absolutely.
And see, I
Not
sit
because I
here.
have a good moral compass, Gary. I would
Okay.
not.
No,
I
no,
know
but
that's
but
wrong,
you
but
understand.
yeah,
But see, here's the deal. I sit here and I talked with the governor and Senator Betancourt. I say this is stupid. This is silly. That we are basically saying we'll give you 100% tax exemption, and you only have to give 50% of it back, and you get to keep the other 50%. This is ludicrous. Why wouldn't everyone do it? Why would I not do it? Why would you not do it? And that's what's so crazy that this thing is, it shows you how misused this was because even though they get to keep 50%, they still are yelling and screaming. And the thing is, when I was passing that legislation, they would not come and talk to me. They were hoping to keep their exemption and do some smoke and mirrors, a reform. And when I would ask them, tell me, if you don't like the 50%, what will you accept? Well, this is where I got them in a corner because they can't come out and say the truth. They can't come out and say, well, Mr. Gates, we're actually keeping 100%. But you know what? We'll give 10% back. Well, that's ludicrous. It would expose how misused this was. They knew that to make their financials work, they had to keep 100% and give nothing back, or
right.
very minuscule. And that's why they can never come and say, okay, we'll agree to 45%, because even that would hurt them. They had to keep 100%. And that's where they got caught trying to get behind legislation that hopefully would either totally torpedo HB 21, or we have some other mindless legislation that doesn't do any reform.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so going forward, what I'm going to be doing next session is there is 3 chapters of using property tax exemptions: the PFC model, the HFC, and public housing. And so I talked to the speaker already. I've talked with Senator Betancourt, and what we're going to try to do, and I've been given the green light, is we want to make all 3 chapters. Even the governor, when I told him about this, he said, Gary, if you do not, he used this example. He said, if you don't reform all 3, we will constantly be playing like whack-a-mole.
yeah,
And he even used the example. He said, Gary, have you ever been to Chuck E. Cheese where you try to hit this little mole that keeps popping up? He says, you need to reform all 3. And that's what we're going to be trying to do this session, is now make all 3 be basically the same model as HFC.
it's gonna come down to section 394, section 392, like you said, and what's going to be the basic foundation? Is it going to also be, because a lot of the 392 were already done in jurisdiction, so Technically, it was more of the gap between market and affordable rents, um, the actual savings of benefits to the community, the compliance with whatever AMI, and then additional auditing on an annual basis to make sure they're doing the right thing. But um, is it the intent to tighten up the requirements and really encourage those, uh, you know, public housing or PFCs to deliver more reductions in rent, or is the intent to eventually, have some of those projects completely revoked from tax exemption and back on the tax roll, or both?
The okay, understand I represent the Texas taxpayer. When you exempt property taxes from one segment of society, all that does is push the burden to someone else.
Yep.
And so eventually for the cities and communities that have a budget for their police and fire and
School
all those other
districts.
critical, that's
Yep.
right, for those other critical things that it takes to run a community, when you have a significant 50% of people live in apartment complexes in Texas, if you wipe that out, then you're going to shift the burden to property owners, to homeowners. And homeowners are okay as long, but they're looking to the legislature to say, okay, if you're going to do that and you're going to increase, in a sense, my property taxes on down the road, make sure I'm getting a fair something in return for that. And the purpose is if we are actually creating lower rents for people who need it, then that's a benefit. But if all you're still able to do is charge market rents, then there's no benefit to the rest of society. And so that's what we're trying to stop. We're going to make sure that, and I'm not going to use words like AMI, I'm not going to use words like affordable housing. What you have to basically do is if you're say market rent for a certain floor plan is $1,000, you're going to have to demonstrate that you're renting others that same floor plan below what you're currently getting. And that difference has to add up to at least 50% of your tax savings.
That's going to be tough because, as you know, some of those markets have been so overly supplied. Some of what we discussed earlier, the demand, as the erosion of what people can really pay, their qualification of income, their ability to provide, W-2 credit score, the immigration challenge, and just overall the fact that, workforce housing has been hurt with inflation. People cannot make, ends meet. And so a lot of those projects and what we're seeing, the absorption, and it depends, I can't generalize. Like Dallas is different from, Frisco, from San Antonio, from Houston, from Austin. But overall, we can probably predict when you look at, the Fed, they actually announced that they may keep the rates high and eventually even do another rate hike. The 10-year treasury is probably going to sit where it is. We're still trying to combat inflation and job growth, disruption with technology and AI and everything. And so there's basically a pretty strong prediction that the next 2 or 3 years for real estate, investors and owners and developers is going to be challenging. The rents are probably going to be the same or lower before eventually we have the supply being absorbed and the market picking back up. Now, some markets will recover quicker than others based on fundamentals, job growth, and other things. But what's going to happen is because the market rents are going to be already kind of low to create true affordable housing, some of those projects will have to be operating at pretty much negative cash flow because of the cost of capital.
Stop right there. See, this is where the industry, I'd laugh when you say those kind of things, because do you understand what you're saying? What you're saying is because of all those factors, those developers and owners are suffering right now. That's
Yep.
what you're saying. Okay.
Correct.
Now think about that. So what they're wanting to do is, because they're suffering, they want to get a tax exemption, and the only way it works is if they have to give nothing in return.
Well, what I'm saying, Gary, is
Isn't
when
that what you're saying?
no, what
Because
I'm
see, they need that tax exemption to make up for the loss. And that is the wrong use of this chapter.
saying is because the market has shifted from both a cost of capital, interest rates, demand, definitely the call it public-private partnership and the ability to make those projects economically viable. The tax exemption is one component, but there's others. There's insurance. There is, incentives to, like on the development side. I'm looking at like different creative financing, like bonds and CPACE credits,
No,
and
no,
other things, right?
I want to stay focused on this. All those factors. Let's take away. Let's take away HFCs. Okay, let's say those didn't exist. But all the same market factors you just described, those properties are suffering, aren't they? They're not able to generate enough rent in today's free market system because of all those factors that you just said. Would you agree?
Or I said, I'm saying they are and they will for probably another 1 or 2 years until we see rent growth.
Right. They are suffering, and they're going to suffer for the next couple of years until the supply is dried up.
Correct.
Would you agree? Okay. That has, what you just described has nothing to do with HFC or
Correct.
PFC. Okay. So what those people are trying to do is they're trying to find a way to lower the economic loss that they're experiencing because the rents are so low.
It's back to whack-a-mole, is if they pursue one avenue and you shut it down, then they're gonna try another one
Okay, but
until
let's set that to the side. The thing is why are they doing this? It's not to provide. They don't want to reduce their rent anymore. What they're saying is our rents are so low, the insurance is so high, the interest rate is so high, the oversupply is so much that it's driven our rental rates down to where we're losing money, and we're going to lose this property. And so they are looking for a way to shore up their financials. And what they did is they came over and said, hey, let's get a tax exemption, wipe out one of the biggest operating costs of an apartment complex. Let's wipe it out. That will improve our financials. But they're not going to lower the rents.
it
And that's what,
converts. Yeah, they
huh?
convert. They're converting the project 50% to affordable housing, right? So they're creating quote unquote public benefits, which, by the way, the analysis is done.
What public benefits are they creating with the tax exemption? What public benefit?
Well, in some instances, I'm talking about the ones done in jurisdiction, they're actually offering some layouts at a lower rent compared to
Okay, now
market
right
rent.
there. If they are offering lower rents below the market rate, then you're entitled to use this exemption as long as the cumulative of that rents below the market rent total 50%. Then it's a win-win situation.
That's right. And some projects are there. I
Then they have
agree.
nothing to worry about.
Right. But my point is the challenge is as the rents are going down for the market rents over the next 1 or 2 years during that absorption, they're going to have to make more efforts reducing the actual affordable rent to show up those
That's to
50%.
get the 100% tax exemption. Yes,
Yep. And
to
and
get
that may start to hurt them financially,
no, no, no,
depending
no,
on.
no, 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 no. I disagree, because by using this, you are reducing half your property taxes, basically. The other half, you're just going to give lower rent. So you're coming out ahead. if
No,
you use
because
this.
you and I know when a developer is going, uh, putting together the pro forma, signing this partnership, getting a construction loan, bringing, all the master plans and everything before they go shovel in the dirt, they have an idea of what those rents are going to look like. By the time the project is delivered and they start to lease up, which happen, the last 12, 18 months, those rents are already 20% or more below the underwriting pro forma because we
Yeah,
are
but
all.
Adrian, that has nothing to do with HFC. It has zero to do with HFC. You understand that, right?
It's
That's market
economics.
conditions.
Yes.
That's the economics of the situation. So you cannot, because of those market conditions, you cannot go and use a program from the state of Texas to now get 100% exemption and not provide any additional reduction of rents.
I agree,
That
and I'm not disputing what my point is. Some of those projects, and I agree, they were well intended, they were economically viable, they were built to create affordable housing. And because of the market having shifted and the rents going down, for them to continue to comply and kind of operate, economically with higher interest rates and inflation and everything, they're going to have to lower the rents on the affordable side even more. And that's where it could eventually become a challenge to that's my point, basically.
they're going to lower it because of the market conditions.
Yep.
That has nothing to do with HHC. The state is saying the state is immune to whatever your market conditions are.
Right.
Okay. The state just says, hey, if you want to use this tool, we don't care where your rents are, basically. But if you want to use this tool, you can get for every dollar of a tax exemption, show us that you're giving 50% back, and we'll let you have it. And why would anyone be against that? I mean, as far as on the developer side,
It works
understand that the whole
when
reason
rents
you
are.
and I are talking, the only reason we're talking, Adrian, is because they want to keep 100% in their pocket to cover their negative cash flow because of all these market conditions. They don't want to give any of it back. And the example I gave to you, if I said, your property taxes, would you do that deal? You said yes. So as much as these people are suffering, they're suffering so bad that even if they give half of it back, they are still hurting. They want to keep all of it. Well, that's wrong. It's not going to happen.
And that's where I think there's a bigger question for, all those developers and investors and owners of multifamily overall is once you look at those options on the table, to your point, the economics, where we see the market recovering in the next couple of years, they're going to be at a crossroad of like, do we maintain this exemption? Can we maintain that exemption, or are we disqualified? Do we move back to market rents, lose the property taxes exemption, and ultimately what the project economically is going to look like? And so I think we may see a lot of projects that will actually unwind and go back to the tax roll, which ultimately that's going to be the intent
No,
as
no.
well.
Why would they do that? Why would they not keep? Why would you go back and pay 100% when you only have to give 50% of your tax exemption? Why would you not? What? If you have $1 million in tax exemption, why would you not give 500,000 lower rents and keep the other 500,000 in your pocket? Why would you not do that?
Because there's other factors. I think, like, one, some of those developers are not supposed to own the real estate for 10, 15 years. They're building it up, leasing it up, getting to 95%, stabilizing the project, and then eventually selling. And the other thing is, because all of this HFCs are new, there's not a lot of data on the exit and the disposition. So we don't know what the buyer profile is going to look like as far as buying those membership interest into the ground lease structure, because those projects, basically the way they're built is you have to maintain that affordability for 15 years or some, or maybe even more or less, because of the calculation of the tax savings over a long period of time. So to your point, they're taking the 100% credit up front. They've underwritten those projects for 15 years, but their idea is once they lease up and the market recovers, they're going to sell those projects to a buyer that will come in and maintain those cash flow. But if between now and then they're disqualified from a compliance standpoint, or the economics is getting to a point where they have to exit the construction loan, convert the construction loan to a permanent loan, the rents are lower, they're going to have to figure something out. It won't be just a discussion or a decision on the exemption and affordability. It's going to be a bigger discussion on the viability and the profitability of the project as a whole. That's what I'm saying in the market, because what I'm saying is, like a year or two ago, everybody was anticipating eventually the Fed is going to cut the rates, the valuations are going to go back up, we're going to be done with the supply. And here we are 2 years later, we're still in the same place where the rents are low, supply has not been absorbed, there's more projects coming out. And so I think what they thought, what they underwrote 2 years ago, today, all of those economic factors have changed. That's my point. And so I don't know what they're going to do and if they're going to continue to be incentivized to maintain those projects as affordable, or if they're going to have to find, other ways to be creative.
See, I don't understand what you're saying. You're using that word affordable again. I say, just forget about that word. You get, regardless of where you're at in the stage of life of your development, the state of Texas has said, we'll give you, for every dollar of a tax exemption, you get to keep 50% yourself, and 50 cents goes to lower rents below the market rate. You still come out ahead 50% of your tax savings.
If
And
the rents have not dropped to a point where the project becomes non-profitable at all.
okay, and I see that is nowhere in the chapters does it say we're using this developer if the market conditions make it to where you can't survive economically, you can use this and you can keep 100%. That's not the chapters doesn't look at that. It's just looking. It doesn't look at. It's in regards to where the market's at. It
No.
just says wherever it is, if you want to use this chapter, you have to reduce your rents below whatever you're charging today. And
that makes sense on the paper. What I'm saying is, in today's world, with operating expenses, lower rents, when you look at a whole project compared to where we were supposed to be, it might create
yes, but see what you're saying is because the free market system has totally destroyed the economics of operating an apartment complex in today's environment.
Yes.
You want to put that economic conditions, and you unfortunately are experiencing that. It's just part of owning apartments. I mean, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And when the times are bad, you cannot then say, you know what, we want to put part of our negative cash flow and our operating costs, and we want to put it on the back of the Texas taxpayer,
Yeah,
the
that's
Texas
wrong.
citizen.
That's
And,
wrong.
and that's what they're trying to do, because it is horrible out there to own an apartment complex right now. I agree 100% with everything you said. Interest rates have not come down. Insurance has gone up. We have an incredible oversupply. And one reason is because a lot of people built complexes using this tool that would not have been built without this tool. And the reason they couldn't build it without the tool is because back then there was already an oversupply. And so they used this tool in a market that did not need any more units. They used this tool to put even more units on the market. And now that has exasperated the problem for those who do not use this tool. And you're almost forcing all the other apartment owners to have to say, I got to use this tool. It's the only way I can compete. It's like me as an operator, I don't use a single one of these tools. But do you know that I could put 100% of my units into this program and not have to reduce my rents at all without the reform that we did? I could put all of my units in this under the PFC guidelines. I could put 100% of my units into the PFC model, get 100% tax exemption, save me tens of millions of dollars in property taxes, and not have to reduce my rents one iota. That's how bad it is.
Then you have to sleep at night.
A lot of people can, and that's because they're just looking at the economics. They're trying to survive.
They're buying time. They all know that at some point, the music has stopped, things are not getting better, and this was a temporary.
And the problem with that is the Fannie Mae market, the Freddie Mac, mainly Fannie Mae. They knew what was happening. That's why they had all these people start signing these documents that said, if the changes, why did they participate in this? They're just as guilty because they wanted to loan more dollars. And so a developer could go to them and say, or Fannie Mae would look at it and say, we can loan you $20 million by you paying 100% tax exemption. But if you convert it to an HFC, we can loan you 25 million. As long as you don't have to reduce your rents. Now, see, have you ever, you've gotten a loan before. And when you get a loan on an apartment project, they want to know what your rents are, don't they? Now, if you tell that lender, I'm going to get 100% tax exemption, don't you think that lender wants to know what's that going to do to your income side?
Absolutely. I mean, they have to
Bingo.
build up
Now
pro
think
forma.
about what you just said.
Yep.
See, the lending knew that there was no effect to the income side. And that's why they said, oh, wow, you don't have to affect anything on the income side, but you get to reduce this expense side. We can loan you 25 million instead of 20 million. And so they were just as guilty perpetuating this thing that was going on, because and that's what's going to be interesting to know in this lawsuit that's going on. When we get into discovery, we're going to ask these lenders, what did you tell the lender was the effect to your economic model when you got 100% tax exemption? And this is, Adrian, this is where it's going to really expose the fraud. Because I believe those financiers are going to say, before the tax exemption, our income was let's say $1 million a year. And after the tax exemption, our income is still $1 million. We suffer no income loss. Because every lender wants to know what is the effect on the income side. And that's what's going to expose, I think, this even more, is even the lenders participated
It was
in this.
supported by loan origination business practices. And you're right. And I know some of them made those loans potentially with a degree of recourse based on, if you're not successful getting the exemption, they're going to have to rebalance the loan based on an adjusted NOI. But to your point, I agree. I mean, I know some groups doing the origination, they were just taking the assumptions from the borrower as face value, and they were not necessarily adjusting their underwriting. So it was like, okay, I will believe if you're telling me this is the case. And to your point, and what's even interesting is, I don't know if you remember, Gary, but there was a point in time towards the end of 24 where the agencies were pencils down and said, we're not going to do it. It lasted a couple of weeks. And then back in Q1 25, they were like, okay, we're actually comfortable, and now we're going to finance again and do refinancing based on this structure of HFC. And to your point, when there's so many fees around the table and it feeds your origination, your lender, your appraisal, your tax consultants, your attorney, there's so much pressure that you have to find a way to make the deal work. And that's going to be interesting if that is being exposed, to your point. So I know it's an hour and 15. I want to be very respectful of your time, Gary, and I appreciate so much you being available, on a Saturday. Where do we go from here? As kind of like a final remark, an encouragement, a warning? Like where do we? What would you say? Like where should we go from here, and what people should kind of seriously think about, over the next coming months?
Well, I am trying, look, and I've talked to the speaker about this, and I told him, I want to get this reform, and I think, has assured me that, hey, you're the one that's going to handle this, Gary, because I want the industry. I'm going to try to come up with these bills because this is not what I wanted to do when serving the legislature. My top issues is trying to bring vocational training full time in our high schools. That's my number one issue. This was never even on my radar when I entered the legislature. I would like to get this done this session so I can end it and not have to deal with it any further. And that's what I've told Senator Betancourt, and I think he and I are going to be working on this. And that's what both of our goals. We've been working on this all three sessions, and we're frustrated by it. But we think we now have the momentum. And I am trying to get out of Ledge Council the reform bills for all three that I hope I give to the industry here in the next 30, 45 days. And I'm sitting with the public housing authorities already. And what we're trying to do is, and look, there's a lot, one way I know about what's going on is because there's a lot of people who want to, and like you, I believe you want to see these tools used in the right way. And the person that originally brought this to me was frustrated because they were trying to do it the right way. They were
Yep.
frustrated by the people that were taking advantage of it. So the people who have told me the most about what the other side is doing were ones who were in those same meetings, but they were frustrated by how it was being abused. So I'm hoping to get all three of this legislation out to the industry so they can talk to me before the session starts and see if we have to do some adjustments. And then I want it to sell through next and then be done with it forever. And I never even want to talk about another PFC, HSC, or PHA again. This isn't what the only reason I'm involved is because if you have a issue, let's say that is medical, why would you not go to Dr. Bonin, Dr. Oliverson, and some of them? If you have a vet problem, why would you not go to Mr. Buckley? Because he's a vet. We have other vets. If you have something to do with the school system, why would you not go to teachers? Well, if you have something to do with the apartment industry, why would you not come with the number one guy in the legislature who deals with the apartment industry that can understand it? And that's how I sort of have winded up with this, is because I have industry expertise knowledge of this. But I hope to get it done this coming session, and then I never want to deal with it again.
When is that session, Gary?
It starts in January of 27.
Okay. So hopefully you'll have the draft, you'll consult with the industry, with the housing authority, you'll see what that inventory look like, what are some of the terms and rules and changes, and then eventually you'll push it through, you'll get the governor sign off on it, and then you'll be done and we can talk about something else. But that's gonna just start the clock on another wave of probably, legal challenges and people throwing a
Probably
fit.
not, because this isn't a novel item anymore.
Yeah.
And the other thing that hurt the industry, you gave the example earlier about where some people use the AMI of 140%.
Yep.
You recall that? Okay. Well, see, the very same people that are doing a lot of the yelling were putting out brochures to raise money around the country to finance these deals. And I got a copy of a lot of those brochures. And some of the very people, and in those brochures, it would have, it might be 50, 60 pages, 100 pages, full color brochure, all beautiful. They would be talking, there'd be a section in there, they would talk about their HFC. And there was this, and they would always say, they use words like Goldilocks situation. They were very upfront saying, we get 100% tax exemption. This is a Goldilocks situation because it does not, we can still raise our rents. And I remember one up in Dallas that used, I think, 140% and said, and said, we can raise our rents by $400. Those very brochures is what I used to give to the governor after my bill was passed and was sitting on his desk for the 10 days that he had to veto it or sign it. I took those very brochures for the very people that were calling him saying, oh, you're going to devastate our industry. And those very brochures exposed what they were trying to do. And that's what got the bill passed. And
There you go.
And
You,
so,
you don't invest in those projects, Gary?
yeah,
It's a 30% IRR over 3 years. I'm gonna take 5% acquisition fee, and I'm gonna exit at a 3% cap rate.
yeah.
All right. Well, hey, this concludes the conversation. I really appreciate, on behalf of the community and the Texan citizens, all the work you're doing, to make the market more efficient, to be more fair, to, follow a moral compass and really trying to bring some light on, those practices or abuses. And, I hope eventually, all of us are, trying to make a living and be successful, but it cannot be at the detriment of the community. And so,
There you go.
we have an affordable crisis in the country. There's a bigger agenda. We talked about inflation, immigration, and it's heartbreaking to see a lot of people out there that are like living under a bridge or homeless when there's thousands and thousands of apartments that are vacant. And so, I hope between private investors, private sector, and then the public, eventually people will come around the table and solution some of those problems, because I think there's bigger issues out there we need to solve as a country and as a state, versus just trying to make a profit over the next 1 or 2 years. So thanks again for your time, Gary, and I look forward to talking to you at the TAP conference in July. I hope I will see you over there.
I haven't been invited yet, so we'll see.
You need to come. You need to wear your Ironman hat and
Yeah.
I'm inviting you. You need to come to Austin and hear what some of those industry players have to say.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. You have a great weekend.
Okay. Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.